On the 25th of May, 1991, the Billboard album chart changed the way it counted. Nothing else changed. Not the music, not the music, not the audience, not the country. Within months, the biggest album in America was by a country singer from Oklahoma. A rap group from Compton took the #1 spot with a record so hostile that several retail chains refused to carry it. Metallica were up there. So were Guns N' Roses. None of those people had suddenly become popular. They had always been that popular. It's just that, for the previous 50 years, nobody had been counting properly, and a significant number of people had preferred it that way. One executive who lived through it described the effect as the emperor having no clothes. Records everyone in the building believed were enormous turned out, once a machine started counting, to be selling almost nothing. This is a video about counting. It is considerably darker than it sounds. Here is how the most important measurement in American music was produced for roughly half a century. Someone at Billboard rang a record shop. That's it. That's the mechanism. Staff would call retailers and distributors across the country and ask the manager what had been selling that week. The manager would tell them from memory, or from a feel for the room, or from a list he'd scribbled down, and often ranked simply from 1 to 50 with no numbers attached. Those lists were combined, weighted, and printed as the national chart. Radio worked on the same principle. Stations reported their playlists. The reports were taken on trust. Now, everyone involved knew this was soft. The interesting question is what a soft system does when it is the only scoreboard in a multi-billion-dollar industry, and the answer is it develops an economy around the softness. The store manager's opinion was worth money, so the store manager received attention. Labels supplied promotional stock, discounts, display materials, co-op advertising. Reporting stores got treated better than non-reporting stores, which meant getting onto the reporting panel was itself commercially valuable, which meant a label's opinion of you mattered. And it ran in the other direction too. Chart panels were segmented by format. A pop panel, an R&B panel, a country panel. Stores selling too much of the wrong thing could be reclassified out of the pop panel, which cost them promotional support, which cost them money. Sit with what that means, because it is the load-bearing fact of the next 30 years. The system did not just fail to count rap and country and metal accurately. The system had a mechanism that actively discouraged stores from reporting them into the pop chart at all. Nobody had to conspire. The incentives did the work. Radio had the same structure and a much bigger scandal. Through the 1950s, a record's fate was decided by airplay, and airplay was decided by disc jockeys, who were local celebrities with genuine unilateral power. A single DJ in a single city could turn a regional record into a national hit. So labels paid them cash, gifts, holidays, cars, co-writing credits on songs the DJ had nothing to do with, which is elegant because a co-writing credit pays out forever and looks like a business arrangement rather than a bribe. The practice had a name, payola. It dated back to the 1930s, and by the 50s it was not a secret. It was simply how the business worked, and it worked especially well for small independent labels who had no other way in. Which meant it was the mechanism that carried rhythm and blues, and then rock and roll, past the gatekeepers of the established publishing world. In 1959 and 1960, Congress held hearings. They arrived on the back of the rigged television quiz show scandals, which had put the public in a mood about media honesty. And it was an election year, and rock and roll was an extremely convenient thing for a politician to be seen cleaning up. Investigators interviewed hundreds of disc jockeys. Stations across the country fired staff preemptively. 2 men are remembered from it. Alan Freed, the DJ who had done more than anyone to popularize the term rock and roll, refused to sign a statement swearing off payola, was fired, was charged, and never recovered a career. Dick Clark, who had ownership stakes in a spread of labels, publishers, distributors, and talent agencies, divested them before testifying, and was praised by the committee chairman as a fine young man. Freed's own defense, which is the best line anyone produced during the whole affair, was that what they called payola in the record business, they called lobbying in Washington. In September 1960, Congress amended the Communications Act. Undisclosed pay-for-play became illegal. Broadcasters had to disclose paid airplay on air. It was a misdemeanor with prison time attached. And it did not work. Not because the law was weak, but because of what the law was written against. The statute prohibited a broadcaster from taking undisclosed payment. It said nothing meaningful about a record label hiring a third party, an independent promotion company, to maintain a relationship with a station, provide it with services, fund its listener contests, and generally ensure that certain records received attention. The middleman is not the loophole. The middleman is the product the law created. Skip forward 45 years. In 2005, the New York Attorney General's office ran an investigation into pay-for-play in the modern music industry. It had subpoena power, and it used it on internal email. The results in sequence. Sony BMG settled in July 2005 for $10 million. Warner Music settled in November 2005 for $5 million. Universal Music Group settled in May 2006 for $12 million. EMI settled later in 2006 for $3.75 million. $30.75 million in total from 4 companies. The money went to nonprofits through a philanthropic intermediary, largely for music education. What the emails showed was not exotic. Vacation packages for programmers, consumer electronics, funding for on-air contests, payment of station operating expenses, independent promoters used as conduits. In one instance, the investigators found the promotional department of a label financing an elaborate trip for a DJ and 3 friends in exchange for adding a specific song to a playlist. In another, a program director for 2 stations emailed a label executive asking, in plain language, for a laptop in connection with promoting a particular artist. The detail that should stay with you is this one. Investigators found payments concealed by documenting them as prizes awarded to contest winners who did not exist. The Attorney General described the practice as pervasive and said the investigation showed that airtime is frequently determined by undisclosed payments rather than by merit or popularity. Now hold both of these facts at once. The activity had been criminal since 1960. It had been the subject of national hearings, destroyed careers, and passed into folklore as a thing that used to happen in the black and white era. And 45 years later, it was still running at industrial scale inside the 4 largest music companies on Earth with an audit trail. The 1960 law didn't end payola. It gave payola a compliance department, which brings us back to May 1991 and the single most important event in the history of the American charts. Billboard switched the album chart to SoundScan, point-of-sale data taken directly from the barcode scanners at the till. Not opinions, not phone calls, receipts. In November of the same year, the Hot 100 singles chart was rebuilt on the same basis, combined with broadcast data systems, a technology that listened to radio and identified songs automatically, rather than asking stations what they had played. For the first time, the scoreboard was not asking anybody anything. It was counting. The results arrived immediately, and they were brutal. Country music, which the old panels had systematically undercounted, turned out to be enormous. Garth Brooks went to #1 on the all-genre album chart and behaved unlike anything the old data had ever shown. Where big albums traditionally opened large and decayed, his simply kept selling at the same rate week after week, because the people buying it weren't following a hype cycle. Rap, which the panels had undercounted for structural, and, let's be honest, partly racial reasons, turned out to be enormous. In June 1991, NWA's second album entered the chart at #2 and hit #1 the following week, the first rap group ever to do it. The group's own response noted that this was the first #1 they had ever had, and credited the counting system for it. In the same week, 5 other rap albums sat on the chart: metal, alternative, R&B, all of it larger than the old system had reported. And here is the part that matters more than any individual name. None of those audiences appeared in 1991. They had been buying records the entire time. The old system had simply been unable, and in places unwilling, to see them. This is the most optimistic moment in this entire story, so enjoy it while it lasts. For a brief period in the early 90s, the American music industry had a measurement instrument that told it the truth, and the instrument reorganized the industry within about 18 months. Labels chased country. Labels chased rap. Radio formats flipped. An honest ruler changed what got made. And then, inevitably, the ruler became the target. There's a principle for this, formulated by the British economist Charles Goodhart. The short version: when a measure becomes a target, it stops being a good measure. The moment a number determines rewards, effort flows into moving the number rather than into whatever the number was supposed to represent. Under the old system, the target was a person's opinion, so you bought people. Under SoundScan, the target was a scan at a till, so the game became manufacture scans. You cannot bribe a barcode, but you can make sure a barcode gets scanned by somebody who wasn't necessarily buying an album. It took the industry about 20 years to fully weaponize this, and the technique that resulted is so simple it's almost insulting. You sell the album attached to something else. August 2018. This is the moment the practice became impossible to ignore, because two very large artists had a public argument about it. Travis Scott's Astroworld was released in early August and opened at number 1 with roughly 537,000 equivalent album units. In the days following release, his team rolled out a large merchandise line, a couple of dozen items released in daily drops, with the album attached. There were also concert ticket packages. The following week, Nicki Minaj's Queen was released and finished second. The gap in the second week was about 20,000 units. Minaj's public objection, posted at length, was specific rather than vague. Her claim was that a very large volume of Scott's traditional album sales were attached to merchandise and to tour ticket access, including, she said, tens of thousands of units where no redemption of the album was even required, and that the marketing push had included promotion from his partner's enormous social following. She had also bundled. She said so. Her argument wasn't that bundling was cheating in itself. It was that the practice had reached a scale where the album sales figure had stopped describing albums. And she was right, in the narrow technical sense that matters here. In an era when almost nobody walks into a shop and buys a CD, a large traditional album sales number in a week like that is not primarily a measurement of people buying an album. It is a measurement of people buying a hoodie. Billboard's response tells you everything about how these systems evolve. In January 2020, they tightened the rules. Bundled albums had to be available separately on the same site. The merchandise alone had to cost less than the bundle. Bundles could only be sold through the artist's own store. 6 months later, in July 2020, they gave up on tightening and banned it. Billboard stated plainly that the January measures had fallen short of accurately reflecting consumer intent. Under the new rules, effective that October, albums bundled with merchandise could not be reported at all, and albums attached to tickets only counted if the buyer had added the album separately as its own line item at a disclosed price. They also closed the adjacent trick. Physical albums sold with an instant digital download attached, where the digital copy was counted immediately to inflate a first week. Now, the physical item has to actually ship before it counts. Note the shape of that. Rule. Workaround. Tighter rule. Better workaround. Ban. Meanwhile, the underlying problem had got much worse because people had stopped buying music. The charts had to start counting streams, and streams are not units. A song played is not an album bought. So Billboard invented a conversion rate, the album equivalent unit, and a conversion rate is a formula, and a formula has to be decided by someone. Currently, and this is the actual arithmetic, to equal one album unit, you need 1,000 paid subscription streams, or 2,500 ad-supported streams. Look at the second number. A listener without a subscription is worth, for charting purposes, 2.5 times less than a listener with one. That is not a hidden bias. It's the published formula, and Billboard's reasoning is straightforward. Paid streams generate far more revenue, and the chart is meant to track commercial performance. But notice what has quietly happened. The chart used to count things people chose to acquire. Now it counts things weighted by how much money the listener's behavior generates for the industry. Those are different measurements wearing the same name. And streams, unlike a barcode at a till, can be manufactured at essentially zero marginal cost. The industry term is streaming fraud, bot farms, click farms, automated play loops on purchased or hijacked accounts. Estimates of scale vary enormously, and every platform insists its own contamination is minimal. One major services music partnerships lead stated publicly in early 2025 that under 1% of streams on their platform are manipulated. In 2024, more than 200 artists signed an open letter about it. The most concrete public glimpse arrived in August 2025, and I want to hedge this carefully because it is unverified. Audio recordings, said to be jail calls made by the rapper Young Thug, leaked online and were reported on by Billboard, among others. In one, a voice presented as his claims to have spent $50,000 buying streams to push another artist's album to #1. An album that, in January 2022, took the top spot by a margin of around 2,300 units. The authenticity of the recordings has not been confirmed by anyone named in them. The artist whose album is discussed has not publicly responded. So treat the specific claim as exactly what it is, an unverified statement in a leaked recording. What isn't unverified is the number, 2,300 units, in a week where the album's total was around 150,000. Whether or not that particular claim is true, the margin at the top of the modern album chart can be small enough that a 5-figure sum spent on artificial plays would be sufficient to change the result. That is a fact about the system, independent of any allegation about any person. Billboard's countermeasures in 2025 read like the changelog of a piece of software under active attack. Digital albums, sold through an artist's own store, now have to actually be redeemed by the buyer to count. CAPTCHA verification was introduced on a music chart to establish that the purchaser is a human being. Any direct-to-consumer store caught submitting illegitimate data 3 times within a year faces a minimum 90-day reporting suspension. And then there's the cap. From April 2025, an album is allowed a maximum of 4 digital direct-to-consumer exclusive versions across its entire lifetime, deluxe editions included. Think about why that rule has to exist. It exists because the strategy had become release the same album repeatedly, different cover, bonus track, alternate vinyl color, signed variant. Each version is a separate purchase for the same fan, and a dedicated fan base will buy several, and each one scans as a unit. This has a physical consequence, which is that a substantial quantity of vinyl is now manufactured as a chart instrument rather than as a record. It gets pressed, shipped, counted, and in a meaningful number of cases never played. Because the point of the object was to be counted. The old system counted opinions, so the industry manufactured opinions. The new system counts objects, so the industry manufactures objects. Which brings us to the present and to the strangest development in the whole 80 years. On the 16th of December 2025, Billboard announced an adjustment to the formula. From the charts dated January the 17th, 2026, streams would count for more. The paid threshold dropped from 1,250 streams per unit to 1,000. The ad-supported threshold dropped from 3,750 to 2,500. On the Hot 100, the ratio between paid and ad-supported narrowed from 1:3 to 1:2.5. That is Billboard moving in the direction of counting free listeners more generously. The following day, YouTube announced it was leaving. In a blog post, the platform's global head of music argued that Billboard's formula was outdated in weighting subscription streams above ad-supported ones, that this failed to reflect how people actually listen, and that after a decade of partnership and extended discussions, the two sides had not been able to agree. The stated principle was that every fan matters and every play should count. As of the 16th of January 2026, YouTube's data stopped flowing into Billboard's American charts. Consider the position this creates. Billboard's charts are meant to measure American music consumption, Streaming is the overwhelming majority of American music consumption, and one of the largest streaming platforms in the world is now simply absent from the measurement, not because of a technical failure, but because of a disagreement about a multiplier. Both parties have a real argument, and both arguments are self-interested in obvious ways. Billboard's case. The chart tracks commercial performance, paid streams generate far more revenue, and weighting them accordingly is a description of reality rather than a value judgment. YouTube's case. A fan is a fan. A teenager who cannot afford a subscription and plays a song 400 times is not 2.5 times less of a listener than someone with a direct debit. Notice that this is not an argument about accuracy. Nobody in this dispute is claiming the other side is counting wrong. Both sides can count perfectly. They disagree about what the count is for. And that is where 80 years of chart history actually arrives. Not at fraud, not at bribery, not at bots. Those are just the weather. It arrives at the recognition that there is no neutral formula, that someone always chooses the weights, and that choosing the weights means choosing whose listening is worth more. In 1958, if you wanted a hit, you gave a disc jockey an envelope. In 1991, a machine started counting receipts, and for a short and genuinely beautiful period, the scoreboard told the truth, and the industry reorganized itself around what it saw. Country and rap and metal came out of the shadow the old system had cast over them, and never went back. Then the industry learned the new rules and began manufacturing scans instead of opinions. Bundles, instant downloads, ticket packages, 9 variants of the same album, streams generated by software on servers. Each exploit was closed. Each closure defined the next one. Rule, workaround, tighter rule, better workaround, ban, over and over, for 35 years, exactly as Goodhart said it would go. And it ends, for now, with a company withdrawing from the scoreboard entirely because it objects to a multiplier. Here's what I'd leave you with. The instinct, when you hear all this, is to conclude that the charts are fake. That's the wrong conclusion, and it's the lazy one. The charts are not fake. They are extremely real, extremely precise measurements of exactly the thing the current formula has been written to measure, which is not the same thing it measured in 2010, or 1995, or 1962. A #1 album is a true statement. It's just that you have to read the footnotes to know what it's a true statement about. And somebody wrote those footnotes. That's the whole story. Not the bribes, not the bots. Somebody always writes the formula, and whoever writes the formula decides which fans count.